They thought they could intimidate me with fake badges and forged documents. What they didn't know was that I've been presiding over their county courthouse for 15 years. By the time I was done with them, 3 people were behind bars, and the entire HOA board was dissolved. But the real mastermind? That revelation would shake our entire community to its core. My name is Judge Sarah Martinez, and I've spent the last 15 years on the bench in Riverside County. I thought I'd seen every kind of deception, every twisted scheme that greed could inspire. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when I was tending to my garden. I just moved into Willow Creek Estates 6 months earlier, seeking a quiet retirement home where I could grow my roses and read legal briefs in peace. The irony wasn't lost on me that a judge would choose to live in an HOA community, but the amenities were excellent, and I figured my legal background would help me navigate any petty neighborhood. Politics. I was deadheading my prize-winning David Austin roses when a shadow fell across my flower bed. I looked up to see 2 men in what appeared to be police uniforms standing at my gate. Something felt off immediately. The badges looked wrong, the uniforms didn't quite fit properly, and neither man carried the confident bearing I'd come to recognize in law enforcement officers. Over my years in court, ma'am, we're here about multiple violations of HOA regulations. The taller one said, pulling out a clipboard. We need to discuss immediate compliance issues on your property. I set down my pruning shears and approached the gate, my legal instincts already on high alert. Officers, what department are you? With exactly? Riverside County HOA Enforcement Division, the shorter one replied without hesitation. We work directly with homeowner associations to ensure code compliance. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. In 15 years as a county judge, I'd never heard of such a division. Moreover, HOA disputes were civil matters, not criminal ones requiring police intervention. I see, I said calmly, keeping my voice neutral. May I see your badges and identification? The taller man stepped forward, flashing what looked like an official badge. Ma'am, you've received multiple notices about your rose garden extending beyond property lines, unauthorized garden structures, and failure to maintain approved landscaping. We're here to issue a final warning before legal action. I examined the badge more closely. The seal was wrong, the typography was off, and the badge number format didn't match any law enforcement agency I knew. These weren't cops, they were imposters, and they'd made the mistake of trying to intimidate a sitting judge. Gentlemen, I said, pulling out my phone, I'm going to need you to wait right here while I make a call. The shorter man's hand moved toward his hip. Ma'am, we need to complete our inspection now. Any interference with official duties is a misdemeanor. My blood ran cold. These men were not only impersonating officers, they were threatening me. I stepped back toward my house, keeping my phone visible. I understand. Let me just grab my reading glasses so I can review these violations properly. Once inside, I immediately called the real Riverside County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Chief Marcus Rodriguez, whom I'd worked with on dozens of cases, answered personally. Marcus, this is Judge Martinez. I need immediate assistance at my residence. 2 men are impersonating police officers on my property. Sarah, are you safe? We're dispatching units now. I'm inside my house. They're claiming to be from some HOA enforcement division that doesn't exist. They have fake badges, and they're threatening legal action over my rose garden. Stay on the line. Units are 3 minutes out. I watched from my window as the fake officers grew increasingly agitated, checking their watches and speaking in hushed tones. The taller one pulled out a phone and made a quick call. I couldn't hear the conversation, but his body language suggested he was receiving orders from someone else when the real sheriff's deputies arrived. The transformation was immediate and telling. The fake officers went from confident and authoritative to nervous and evasive. They couldn't produce proper identification, their explanations were contradictory, and their fake badges crumbled under scrutiny. As Deputy Rodriguez placed them in handcuffs, the shorter man finally broke. Look, we were just doing what we were told. The HOA board hired us to scare her into compliance. They said she was some retired teacher causing problems. My jaw dropped. The HOA board had hired fake police officers to intimidate me. This wasn't just about rose gardens and property lines. This was conspiracy, impersonation of law enforcement officers, and potentially extortion. Deputy Rodriguez, I said as the suspects were loaded into patrol cars, I think we need to take a very close look at the Willow Creek Estates HOA board. This level of deception suggests something much larger is at play. That evening, I received a call that chilled me to the bone. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow who lived 3 houses down. Judge Martinez, she whispered into the phone. I saw what happened today. Those same men came to my house last week. They said I owe the HOA $15,000 in special assessments, and that if I didn't pay immediately, they put a lien on my home and have me evicted. I was so scared. I wrote them a check. The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just intimidation. This was organized fraud on a massive scale, targeting vulnerable homeowners with fake authority figures and fabricated violations. The HOA board wasn't just corrupt. They were running a sophisticated criminal enterprise. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my quiet retirement had just become the biggest case of my career. But this time, I wouldn't be presiding from the bench. I would be fighting from the inside, and I was about to discover just how deep this conspiracy went. The next morning, I did what any good judge would do when faced with a complex case. I started building evidence. But first, I needed to understand the scope of this operation. Mrs. Chen's story suggested this wasn't an isolated incident, and my legal experience told me that criminals rarely stop at one victim when a scheme is working. I spent the day making calls to neighbors, using my judicial connections to access county records, and researching the background of our HOA board members. What I discovered made my 15 years of criminal cases look like parking violations. Willow Creek Estates HOA was being run by a board of 5 members, led by President Derek Hoffman, a man whose background check revealed a previous conviction for securities fraud that had somehow been expunged from public records. Treasurer Linda Vasquez had filed for bankruptcy twice, and Secretary Michael Torres had been involved in 3 previous HOA disputes in other counties, each ending with his sudden departure and missing funds. But the smoking gun came when I accessed the county recorder's office through official channels. Over the past 18 months, the HOA had filed 17 liens against properties in our community, totaling over $100,000 in claim violations and special assessments. Every single one had been filed using forged documents and fabricated violations. My phone rang as I was reviewing the financial records. It was Deputy Rodriguez. Sarah, we've got a problem. The 2 suspects from yesterday lawyered up, but before they did, they gave us some interesting information. They claimed they were hired through a private security company called Apex Enforcement Solutions. We looked into it. The company doesn't exist. It's a shell corporation registered to a P.O. box in Nevada. That's not the worst part, Marcus. I've been digging into the HOA finances. They've been systematically defrauding homeowners for over a year, using fake violations and intimidation tactics. Mrs. Chen isn't their only victim. How many are we talking about? At least 17 confirmed cases, possibly more. We're looking at organized fraud, conspiracy, extortion, and impersonation of law enforcement. The total damages could exceed $500,000. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called an emergency meeting of all Willow Creek Estates residents, using my judicial authority to request use of the community center. If the HOA board was running a criminal enterprise, the homeowners deserved to know. The community center was packed that evening. Nearly 200 residents filled every seat and lined the walls. I stood at the podium, looking out at faces filled with confusion, concern, and in some cases, recognition. My name is Judge Sarah Martinez, and I live at 1247 Rose Garden Lane. Yesterday, 2 men impersonating police officers came to my home on behalf of our HOA board. What I discovered after their arrest is that our community has been the target of an organized criminal conspiracy The room erupted. Voices overlapped as residents shared their own experiences. Mrs. Patterson from Maple Street had paid $5,000 for a fabricated architectural violation. The Johnsons on Oak Avenue had been threatened with foreclosure over non-existent drainage issues. The elderly Morales couple had emptied their savings account to pay $22,000 in fraudulent special assessments, fearing they would lose their home of 30 years. This ends now, I announced as the crowd settled. I'm forming a legal action committee, and we're going to expose every aspect of this fraud. But I need your help. If you've been contacted by fake enforcement officers, if you've paid money based on threats or intimidation, if you've received suspicious violation notices, I need you to come forward. By the end of the evening, 43 residents had reported fraudulent contacts, and the documented theft totaled over $400,000. But the whole board wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I found a legal notice taped to my front door. The HOA was suing me for defamation, interference with business operations, and inciting residents against lawful authority. They were seeking $50,000 in damages and an injunction preventing me from discussing HOA matters with other residents. I almost laughed. They were suing a sitting judge for exposing their criminal conspiracy. The arrogance was breathtaking. That's when I made my second crucial discovery. While reviewing the lawsuit documents, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The legal papers were filed by Patterson, Williams and Associates, a law firm I knew well. They'd appeared in my courtroom dozens of times over the years, always representing clients in complex fraud cases. They were expensive, sophisticated, and connected. Someone with serious money and legal expertise was backing this operation. This wasn't just a corrupt HOA board running a small-time scam. We were dealing with a professional criminal organization that had infiltrated our community as part of a larger scheme. I called my old colleague, Judge Robert Chen, who handled financial crimes in the federal district court. Bob, I need advice. I'm dealing with what looks like organized fraud in my HOA, but the sophistication level suggests federal involvement. The legal representation alone would cost more than these board members could afford. Sarah, you're describing what sounds like a real estate fraud ring. We've been seeing these operations pop up across Southern California. They target upscale communities, infiltrate HOA boards, and systematically loot homeowners through fabricated violations and intimidation. The profits are enormous, and they're often connected to larger money laundering operations. As I hung up, I realized the true scope of what we were facing. This wasn't just about Willow Creek Estates. We were dealing with organized crime, and tomorrow I would walk into court not as a judge, but as a victim fighting for justice. Walking into the Riverside County Courthouse as a defendant rather than a judge was surreal. I climbed these same steps thousands of times, but never with my own freedom and reputation on the line. The HOA's lawsuit against me was scheduled before Judge Patricia Williams, a colleague I'd worked alongside for over a decade. The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek Hoffman and the whole board had chosen to fight their battle in the very courthouse where I'd spent my career. They were either incredibly arrogant or desperately stupid. I was betting on arrogant. Your Honor, began Attorney James Patterson, representing the HOA. Judge Martinez has used her position and influence to defame my clients and interfere with lawful HOA operations. Her accusations of fraud are baseless and malicious, designed to avoid paying legitimate assessments on her property. I watched Patterson carefully. He was smooth, expensive, and confident, but there was something else in his demeanor. He kept glancing toward the gallery where Derek Hoffman sat with the other board members. That wasn't normal attorney behavior. He seemed nervous, almost like he was taking directions from someone else. Your Honor, I responded when it was my turn. I'd like to present evidence that will demonstrate not only the baseless nature of this lawsuit, but the criminal conspiracy underlying it. Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. Proceed, Judge Martinez. I began with the documented evidence, the fake police officers, the forged violation notices, the illegal liens, and the financial records showing systematic theft from homeowners. But The real bombshell came when I introduced recorded phone calls between Mrs. Chen and the fake enforcement officers. You can hear clearly on this recording, I told the court that the defendant's agents threatened an elderly resident with immediate foreclosure unless she paid fabricated violations totaling $15,000. Patterson jumped up. Objection. These recordings were made without consent and are inadmissible. Your Honor, I replied calmly. California is a one-party consent state, and Mrs. Chen recorded these calls on advice from the Sheriff's Department. After reporting the fraud, they're completely admissible. Judge Williams nodded. Overruled. Continue. Judge Martinez. But then Patterson did something unexpected. He called Derek Hoffman to the stand, and Hoffman's testimony completely changed the game. Your Honor, Hoffman said, his voice steady and confident. Judge Martinez has it completely backwards. We hired additional security because she had been threatening board members and vandalizing community property. The violations against her property are legitimate and well documented. He produced a folder of photographs showing my rose garden extending over property lines, unauthorized structures, and what appeared to be spray-painted graffiti on community signs. My heart sank. The photos looked authentic, and if real, would undermine my entire case. Furthermore, Hoffman continued, Judge Martinez has been using her judicial position to intimidate residents into supporting her false claims. We have witnesses who will testify that she threatened them with legal consequences if they didn't back her story. This was a complete fabrication, but Hoffman delivered it with the confidence of someone telling the truth. Worse, he was smart enough to know that attacking a sitting judge requires substantial evidence. Evidence he seemed to have. Patterson then called Linda Vasquez, the HOA treasurer, who testified about my supposed threats and aggressive behavior. According to her testimony, I had demanded special treatment because of my judicial position and had threatened to destroy anyone who opposed me. I was watching my reputation and career crumble in real time. These weren't the desperate lies of small-time criminals. This was a coordinated, sophisticated attack designed to discredit me while painting themselves as victims of judicial abuse. Then something happened that I never expected. A man I didn't recognize stood up in the gallery and approached the bench. Your Honor, he said, I'm FBI Special Agent David Morrison. I need to present urgent evidence to the court. Judge Williams looked stunned. Agent Morrison, this is highly irregular, Your Honor. We've been conducting a 6-month investigation into real estate fraud rings operating in Southern California. The evidence being presented in this case is directly relevant to ongoing federal criminal proceedings. Agent Morrison handed a folder to the court clerk. Your Honor, the photographs and documents presented by Mr. Hoffman are fabricated. Our forensic analysis shows they were digitally manipulated. Moreover, we have surveillance footage of Mr. Hoffman and his associates staging the property damage shown in these photos. The courtroom erupted. Patterson looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Hoffman started to stand, then sat back down, his face pale. Furthermore, Agent Morrison continued, we have recordings of phone calls between Mr. Hoffman and organized crime figures in Nevada, discussing the systematic targeting of upscale whole communities for financial fraud. This operation has victimized over 300 families across 4 counties. Judge Williams called for order. Mr. Patterson, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Patterson was frantically whispering with Hoffman, but before he could respond, Agent Morrison dropped the final bombshell. Your Honor, we also have evidence that Attorney Patterson has been knowingly participating in this conspiracy, using his law firm to legitimize fraudulent legal actions and intimidate victims. Federal warrants were issued this morning for his arrest, along with warrants for all 5 HOA board members. As FBI agents moved into the courtroom, I realized this case was about to become something none of us had expected, but the biggest shock was yet to come. Federal agents were placing handcuffs on Derek Hoffman when he looked directly at me and smiled. It wasn't the expression of a defeated criminal. It was the look of someone who still held cards no one else knew about. Your Honor, Agent Morrison addressed Judge Williams. We request an immediate recess to execute these warrants and secure additional evidence. As the courtroom cleared, I found myself alone with Agent Morrison and Judge Williams. That's when Morrison revealed the truth that would shake our entire legal community. Judge Martinez, he said, this investigation began because of a tip from someone inside the conspiracy. What we discovered goes far beyond HOA fraud. We're dealing with a sophisticated money laundering operation that's been using HOA communities across Southern California to clean money from drug trafficking and human smuggling operations. The scope was staggering. Fake violations, fabricated assessments, and intimidation tactics weren't just theft. They were part of an elaborate system to process dirty money. Through seemingly legitimate HOA transactions, the profits were then filtered through shell corporations and offshore accounts. But here's what's going to shock you, Morrison continued. The person who tipped us off, who's been secretly recording conversations and gathering evidence for 6 months, was Linda Vasquez. I stared at him in disbelief. The HOA treasurer. She was testifying against me an hour ago. That was part of her cover. She's been working undercover with us since last October when she realized what was happening and came forward. Her testimony today was designed to draw out the real mastermind. Who? Morrison paused, checking his phone. We're about to find out. Vasquez has been wearing a wire for months. The person giving orders to Hoffman, the one who's been directing this entire operation, is supposed to be arriving at the courthouse in the next few minutes. Judge Williams shook her head. Agent Morrison, this is highly irregular. I've never had a federal investigation unfold in the middle of a civil proceeding. Your Honor, with respect, this isn't a civil proceeding anymore. We're about to arrest someone who's been using the legal system itself as part of their criminal enterprise. 20 minutes later, we returned to the courtroom. Linda Vasquez was now sitting with the FBI agents instead of at the defendant's table. Derek Hoffman and James Patterson were in federal custody, and the remaining HOA board members were nowhere to be seen. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Williams announced to the packed courtroom, this proceeding has been suspended pending federal criminal investigations. However, Agent Morrison has requested permission to make a statement regarding the disposition of this case. Morrison stood, over the past 6 months, working with undercover operative Linda Vasquez. The FBI has documented a criminal conspiracy involving real estate fraud, money laundering, extortion, and corruption of public officials. The evidence shows that Judge Martinez was targeted specifically because her legal expertise posed a threat to the operation. He paused, scanning the courtroom. The conspiracy involved not just HOA board members and private attorneys, but also corrupt officials in local government who facilitated the filing of fraudulent liens and legal documents. My heart stopped. Corrupt local officials. Who else was involved? Morrison continued. The person coordinating this operation, the individual who selected target communities and recruited corrupt HOA boards, has been arrested this morning at Los Angeles International Airport attempting to flee to a non-extradition country. The courtroom doors opened, and federal agents escorted in a figure I recognized but couldn't immediately place. Then it hit me like a physical blow. It was County Clerk Margaret Foster, a woman I'd worked with professionally for 15 years. She'd been in charge of processing legal documents, filing liens, and maintaining property records for the entire county. She'd had access to everything: property values, homeowner financial information, legal proceedings. Margaret Foster has been selling information on high-value properties to organized crime figures, identifying vulnerable communities, and using her position to legitimize fraudulent legal documents. Morrison announced, she's been the inside source that made this entire operation possible. Foster looked at me as she was led past, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. A calculating coldness that I'd mistaken for professional efficiency. She'd been sitting in county meetings with me for years, processing my own legal documents, while secretly orchestrating the targeting of my community. The charges include conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, bribery of public officials, and racketeering, Morrison concluded. The total amount stolen from homeowners across 4 counties exceeds $2.3 million. Judge Williams looked stunned. Agent Morrison, what happens to the civil case? Your Honor, all charges against Judge Martinez are being dropped. The evidence shows she was targeted for exposing a federal criminal conspiracy. Moreover, her actions led to the rescue of over 300 families who were being systematically defrauded. As the gavel fell, I realized that my quiet retirement community had become the center of one of the largest organized crime takedowns in Southern California history. Mrs. Chen, the elderly widow who'd been scared to refuse paying fake violations, had provided the testimony that brought down a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later when I received a letter from the reconstituted Willow Creek Estates HOA. They wanted to rename the community Garden in my honor. I declined, but suggested they name it after Linda Vasquez instead, the woman who risked her life to expose the truth. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people we trust the least turn out to be the heroes of the story. In my 15 years on the bench, I'd learned that the truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep people try to bury it. The best part, my roses never looked better.